Welcome back. Today we're reading the second chapter in Management in Canada, The Competitive Challenges. And this chapter's title is The Environments of Business, Culture, Social Responsibility, and Ethics. After studying this chapter, we should be able to distinguish between the terms internal environment and external environment, explain why managers must consider their environments in all of their activities, explain why workforce culture is such an important issue for managers to understand, discuss how a person's values are formed and how they influence behavior, explain social responsibility as social obligation, social reaction, and social responsiveness. Discuss why companies are becoming more interested in producing environmentally friendly products. Describe how an organization can best develop an effective code of ethics, and explain why ethical behavior is important in shaping work life. And just as a reminder, this particular volume, I believe, was copyrighted in 2000. So there might be some pretty outdated stuff in here, but let's see. So it starts with a magazine cover. Maclean's The Brie X Bust is the great gold find of fraud. And then the title of the first section says, Environments and Ethical Issues. No organization exists in a vacuum. Rather, it is shaped and constrained by external forces. At the same time, some of those external forces may offer opportunities. The external environments include economic and social conditions, government regulations and initiatives, pressures from competitors, suppliers, and customers, and countless other influences. At the same time, every organization is constantly shaping and reshaping its internal environment, which includes its products or services, its workforce, its level of technology, and its access to financing. While the organization is shaping its internal environment, the internal environment is also shaping the organization. It is important for managers to identify the parameters of the various environments within which the organization functions. Then the manager must find ways to adapt behavior, change the environments, or as a last resort, move to a more compatible situation. How an organization responds to its external and internal environments will depend on its leadership and its culture. The responses are reflected in both its short-term and its long-term plans and actions. One important manifestation of an organization's responses to its environments may be seen in the ethical standards it reflects. Some individuals, whether managers or non-managers, and some organizations, whether large or small, business or not-for-profit, exhibit the highest standards of behavior. Others do not operate within well-defined ethical standards or may even consistently behave outside accepted norms. Those individuals and organizations that fail to appreciate the damage done to themselves by unethical practices usually survive for a while, apparently unscathed, but eventually succumb to the bad reputations they earn, even if they escape actual legal sanctions. Prudent managers will select employers whose ethical standards are congruent with their own. To do otherwise is to subject oneself to continual conflict between one's own standards and the prevailing culture of the employing organization. Such a mismatch creates painful tension within the manager and confusion within the organization. And I think that paragraph's important, so I'm going to read it one more time. Prudent managers will select employers whose ethical standards are congruent with their own. To do otherwise is to subject oneself to continual conflict between one's own standards and the prevailing culture of the employing organization. Such a mismatch creates painful tension within the manager and confusion within the organization. The broadcast and print media often publish examples of unethical behavior. Concerns about ethics in business are reflected in reports of situations such as those in which BC Hydro executives were said to have taken advantage of insider information. In recent years, 4 cement companies were convicted of price fixing and fined $5.8 million in Quebec Superior Court. Recently, there have been widely publicized examples of some of the world's oldest scams. Who would have believed that in today's world, in which scientific testing is highly accurate and communication is quick, that such scams could have fooled investors? Based on little more than well-orchestrated hype, investors rushed to buy BRIEX shares. Oh, so that's what that original article screenshot was. They apparently believed reports that a massive gold deposit had been discovered, when the only verification came from tainted reports by those who stood to make a fortune if the public could be persuaded to invest. I'm going to read that part again. They apparently believed reports that a massive gold deposit had been discovered when the only verification came from tainted reports by those who stood to make a fortune if the public could be persuaded to invest. Then, too late, eager investors learned that the test drill cores had been salted with gold granules and that there was no gold at BRIEX. People who lost money in BRIEX could have taken warning from the widely publicized scam only a few months earlier involving Calgary-based Timbuktu Gold Corp that also was based on salting of gold samples. Instead, investors learned the truth of the old adage, if something looks too good to be true, it probably is. On a less dramatic note, frequently a news story will report a situation in which a business manager or employee has been caught doing something illegal or unethical. But how many unethical acts aren't reported? No one knows for sure. There is a widespread perception that although the public, the courts, and corporate officers treat employees who are caught falsifying credentials on resumes or padding expense accounts harshly, there's widespread, I'll read that start again. There is a widespread perception that although the public, the courts, and corporate officers treat employees who are caught falsifying credentials on resumes or padding expense accounts harshly, they are lenient with those who manipulate financial reports and mislead shareholders and the public, or who use insider information for personal profit. Whether this perception is accurate or not, it is clear that reputations of individuals and of organizations can be ruined by revelations of unethical or even questionable behavior. Some business practices come close to the line of unethical behavior, and their evaluations depend on the standards of the beholder. For example, Toys R Us managers were reported to have sent employees to rival Child World stores around the country to buy large quantities of items that Child World was selling at greatly reduced prices. These toys, purchased at loss leader prices, were then resold at a markup in Toys R Us stores. Was this behavior unethical? Sun Life, Crown Life, and other life insurance companies have been faced with massive class action lawsuits for allegedly unethical sales presentations in the early 1980s and early 1990s. Policyholders claimed to have understood sales representatives to promise that in a few years, dividends on the policies would pay all remaining premiums. When interest rates dropped throughout Canada, these expectations did not materialize. After several years of litigation, settlements were reached. This example raises the question of whether unrealistic sales presentations are unethical or just a case of caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware, is what it says in brackets. In recent years, many Canadian companies have entered foreign markets for the first time. They have found that in many countries, little can be accomplished unless they pay bribes to people closely connected with host governments. Some Canadians belatedly may have recognized the extent of corruption that exists in some of those countries as they followed the ludicrous claims made by relatives of Indonesia's president for ownership of what was then thought to be the massive gold discovery by Briex. I'll read that again because I muffled it. Some Canadians belatedly may have recognized the extent of corruption that exists in some of those countries as they followed the ludicrous claims made by relatives of Indonesia's president for ownership of what was then thought to be the massive gold discovery by Briex. Some people and some countries' laws distinguish between out-and-out bribery on the one hand and what is variously described as grease, kumsha, or facilitating payments. Bribes are disapproved of or even prosecuted, but facilitating payments are permitted. In this context, bribery means giving something of value to decision makers to cause them to change their decision. Facilitating payments, by contrast, encourage an official to make the same decision as would have been made without the payment, but to do it more promptly. A typical example of a facilitation payment would arise when a ship is anchored in the harbor of Lagos, Nigeria, awaiting a routine customs clearance before it can unload its cargo. The customs official eventually will clear the ship and cargo, but may take several weeks to do so. Meanwhile, the company with cargo on board is paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in a day in demurrage while the ship is sitting idle. It is tempting to slip the customs agent a $100 bill so that the necessary papers will be pulled from the bottom of the pile and given the required stamps of approval immediately, instead of after a costly delay. Managers responsible for foreign operations must consider whether to accede to local custom or to abide by standards that are taken for granted in Canada. And what happens when the manager returns to Canada? Is the manager so habituated to an atmosphere of corruption that something seems normal when in fact it violates Canadian standards? The reputation of the Canadian Olympic Committee has suffered immeasurably as a result of allegations that its members received benefits to choose a particular host city over another. There is no perfect solution to what some commentators have dubbed the ethical crisis. Managers must set the tone, serve as a role model, and lead in a positive way. Managers can reward and call attention to examples of ethical behavior. No code of ethics and no amount of cajoling by managers will have much influence if organizational rewards go to the people who cut corners. I'm going to read that one again. No code of ethics and no amount of cajoling by managers will have much influence if organizational rewards go to people who cut corners. Managers must communicate in unmistakable terms what is expected of employees. When all employees understand and internalize the organization's ground rules, the corporate culture will shape ethical behavior. Like many organizations, Canadian Pacific Hotels and Resorts gives each employee a code of business conduct, stating that its provisions are mandatory and that full compliance is expected in all circumstances. Like many other aspects of the modern organization, significant changes are occurring in concepts of business ethics. The successful manager and the forward-looking organization will serve as bellwethers, leading the change towards improved ethical standards and with that towards improved public acceptance and a better society. And it says the source in this case was that it was adapted from How to Be Ethical and Still Come Out on Top, The Economist, June 5th, 1983. And it actually cites about a dozen more people and articles. The environments of business. So we're moving on to the next section. And before we start, there's a couple relevant definitions. Environment, the factors that affect an organization and the situations within which the organization functions. External environment, all factors such as laws, competition, technology, social cultural norms and trends, and ecology that are outside the organization and that may affect it. For convenience, business writers usually refer to the organizations, institutions, and forces that affect an organization as its environment. Those influences outside the organization are referred to as the organization's external environment. Managers cannot control some of the external environmental forces that shape how an organization and its resources are managed. Sometimes unexpected events require businesses to make radical changes in the ways they operate. For example, in 1993, in a widely publicized case, a 2-year-old child died after eating hamburgers tainted with deadly E. coli bacteria. Before the source of the bacteria had been identified, some 300 other people had been made seriously ill. Although this tragic event arose in a single fast food outlet, in brackets Jack in the Box, its effects were far-reaching throughout the whole fast food industry. Not only did Jack in the Box franchises suffer a massive drop in customers, but also the entire meat inspection system was called into question. So I actually haven't heard of that particular fast food restaurant. So I wanted to see if, all these years later, if it still was open. And it's showing online that it was founded in 1951. And as of January 4th of 2022, it has over 2,200 locations, primarily serving the West Coast of the US. So I'm actually surprised that, anyway, I'm surprised, but I guess good for them. Yeah, so I'll just resume. So although this tragic event arose in a single fast food outlet, Jack in the Box, its effects were far-reaching throughout the whole fast food industry. Not only did Jack in the Box franchises suffer a massive drop in customers, but also the entire meat inspection system was called into question. As a result of consumer concern in both Canada and the United States, in brackets where the problem arose, federal meat inspection procedures were tightened. Federal meat inspection procedures were tightened, and the restaurant industry took further steps to ensure the safety of the meat it serves. Since fast food chains spend about $3 billion per year on ground beef, their demands for more stringent safety measures got the attention of meat packers. Some restaurant chains have developed in-house techniques for detecting and killing E. coli and for ensuring that ground beef is fully cooked before being served. The publicity arising from this one tragic incident has influenced the ways in which managers function. Besides the external environment, an internal environment also exists in every organization. Managers must recognize and adapt their behavior to aspects of the organization's internal environment, such as the mood and the morale of its employees, its financial strength and weaknesses, and its organizational structure and style of management. This chapter first examines the internal environment and then reviews the external environment. It then discusses social responsibility and ethics. To function effectively in today's world, managers must consider and understand their environments, the issues of social responsibility, and the ways in which to respond to ethical dilemmas. And it has a picture with the caption, "Inspectors grade and inspect for possible contamination all meat sold through normal market channels, protecting the consumer." So before we get into the next heading, I'll give you the definitions that are relevant. So internal environment. The factors within an enterprise, such as employees, structure, policies and practices, and systems of rewards that influence how work is done and how goals are accomplished. Culture, an organization's way of life, including the meanings and practices shared by members of the organization, as shown in common ways of thinking, traditions, customs, manners, and ways of dealing with each other and with outsiders, all of which are transmitted to new members of the organization by example and sometimes by directives. The internal environment. An organization's internal environment directly influences how work is done and how goals are accomplished. Factors that make up the internal environment include employees, attitudes and perceptions, workflow, office and plant layout, manager style, and the reward system. The internal environment factors together can constitute the organization's culture. So I'll just read again what the factors are. Factors that make up the internal environment include employees' attitudes and perceptions, workflow, office and plant layout, manager style, and the reward system. The internal environment factors together constitute the organization's culture. An organization's culture embraces the behavior, rituals, and shared meaning held by employees that distinguishes that organization from all others. Managers develop employees by training them, setting goals, and rewarding good performance. I will say though that I have been in experiences where the managers didn't train at all. So although I agree that the managers should develop employees by training them, I don't be surprised if you do run into an environment where that doesn't happen. So managers develop employees by training them, setting goals, and rewarding good performance. All members of the organization, from the chief executive officer to the newest office clerk, from the warehouse staff to the outside sales representatives, share responsibility for the organization's products and services. Consequently, all share in creating and sustaining the organization's culture. Culture is perpetuated because through their own behaviors and sometimes through oral admonitions, current employees pass the accepted traits and behaviors along to new employees. Culture serves as a guideline for what is appropriate and acceptable behavior because it provides an identity for employees. Culture is reflected in the formal and informal rules that employees must follow in order to belong. I'll read that again. Culture is reflected in the formal and informal rules that employees must follow in order to belong. As stated in a thoughtful discussion in the Journal of Applied Behavior Science, it's quoting, culture, by definition, is elusive, intangible, implicit, and taken for granted, but every organization develops a core set of assumptions, understandings, and implicit rules that govern day-to-day behavior in the workplace. Until newcomers learn the rules, they are not accepted as full-fledged members of the organization, end quote. When a strong positive culture emerges, organizational commitment, loyalty, and cooperation can help make the organization strong and effective. However, culture can be a liability when behaviors and work patterns are not congruent with values and actions that enhance performance. I'll read that again. However, Culture can be a liability when behaviors and work patterns are not congruent with values and actions that enhance performance. Changes in the external environment may require rapid responses and adaptation. However, an ingrained culture may inhibit or block necessary changes. IBM developed a strong culture that apparently could not adapt when new competitors created the need for rapid changes. The resistance of the IBM culture slowed the firm's ability to respond to strong competitors like Apple and Compaq, which were able to capture market share. IBM is still attempting to gain back some of the market share that it lost to these quicker responding competitors. Multiple cultures. And before we jump into that section, I'll give you the relevant definition, which is dominant culture. An organization's core values that are shared by a majority of its members. Research suggests that most organizations have a dominant culture and a set of subcultures. The dominant culture designates the core values shared by the majority of employees. It represents the distinct mark of a company such as McDonald's, which emphasizes quick and efficient service, and of credit unions, which are known for their personal approach to banking services. Subcultures develop because of common situations or problems faced by a group of employees. Subcultures are likely to occur in separate units, groups, or departments. The finance department, sales department, or production department, for example, can have a subculture shared by members of the unit, but different in significant respects from the subcultures that prevail in the rest of the organization. There are strong and weak dominant cultures. In an organization with a strong culture, core values are intensely held and widely shared. In such an organization, employees or members' behaviors can be dramatically affected by the values of other employees and role models. In Apple Computer's early days, it was a common practice to work long after the shift was over to complete the job, especially when a group was attempting to solve a problem. In other organizations, it is part of the culture to leave at the official quitting time, regardless of the workload, and any employees who frequently work later are considered suspect by their fellow employees. Cultures vary from organization to organization. For example, Bausch & Lomb has a very strong, dominant culture reflecting the personality of its tenacious CEO, Dan Gill. He began his career as an auditor, and even after having been promoted through several positions, still closely examines each division's financial report every month. Partly as a consequence of Gill's attention to financial details, Bausch & Lomb managers at all levels know they must be completely familiar with the financial aspects of their parts of the company. In contrast, the culture at Microsoft apparently is more laid back and entrepreneurial, reflecting the personality of its CEO, Bill Gates. Even though Microsoft seems to have a more casual culture, in fact, it is just as competitive as Bausch & Lomb. And Gates does not brook carelessness on the part of his managers. Gates' relationship to his company has been described as more like a headmaster or supervisor than a tycoon. To be questioned by him is like a final university examination, but behind that discipline is still the ultimate motivation of profit. And we've got a real world reflection. How do you define culture? The culture of a work group may act as an invisible force that influences behavior. Culture goes beyond policy to demonstrate what actually happens in an organization. And the only way to really understand it is often to experience it. Therefore, culture becomes a representation of understandings, norms, values, and beliefs that are shared by organizational members. You can, however, get a measure of the organization's culture by considering the following aspects. Symbols. What are the shared things in an organization? Anything from open offices to casual clothing. Language. What shared language is used in the organization? Abbreviations, common words, technical language. Activities. Are there shared rituals or actions? Masses of meetings, personal relationships and communications, close ties to the union, long service recognition teas. Stories. What stories are told and shared in this organization? Gossip, horror stories, celebrations of success. Now, to take one step closer to the culture of the organization, what do each of these areas tell you about how the organization fully operates? What is the view of top management? How do employees feel about the organization? What are the organizational priorities? What is valued and rewarded? How is status distributed? What are operations like on a day-to-day basis? So this was contributed by Sherry Campbell, British Columbia Institute of Technology. And then we have a management in the real world subsection. And it's titled Total Ethics at Tradecraft. Simply having a code of ethics doesn't make a business ethical. Agreed. Neither does an ethical response in reaction to consumers' demands or to political pressure. Instead, argues Richard Evans, External Affairs Director of Tradecraft PLC, the ethics movement in business should be motivated by a vision of total ethics on the order of the total quality and the zero defect movements. Evans says that to develop total ethics, managers must be trained and encouraged to get out of the habit of viewing ethical strategy in terms of responses to internal and external threats to the business. Managers must be encouraged to take an active role in creating an ethical society. Evans has developed a new total ethics program for Tradecraft, a limited company selling craft products from Bangladesh. Begun in 1979, it seeks to redress the imbalance in wealth and opportunity between people in developing countries and people in the rich industrialized countries. In its first 12 years, the company sold more than 20 million worth of products from the third world. Evans points out that the Tradecraft view is that businesses are not distinct social entities, but merely activities of a society as a whole. In addition, the company believes that business plays a major social role in human development through the way people at work are taught to and then enabled to fulfill their economic role in society, or in its effects on those it excludes from an economic role. To take into account this broad social responsibility, Tradecraft operates with the interests of multiple stakeholders in mind. Evans said, quote, "If business is regarded as an activity of society, we can define a much larger number and range of stakeholders than the shareholders with the financial interest," end quote. Stakeholders that Tradecraft takes into account include lenders, creditors, employees, managers, government, consumers, suppliers, and others. The company's total ethics culture was created within its overall mission. Tradecraft promotes practical service and partnership for change, which will characterize the organization that puts people before profits. Evans states that total ethics is manifest in Tradecraft's business practices as it aims to be one of the agencies that will change society through the nature and manner of its business activities. Its founders and directors do not claim to know what is best for society and have therefore encouraged the participation of all stakeholders in developing the company objectives and have made its policies and practices open for public scrutiny. Public demand for ethical business practices has deep roots in Western ethical traditions. With the complex and competitive new global marketplace, a new view of total ethics founded on continuous improvement and taking the views of various stakeholders into account seems to be a workable alternative. Adapted from Richard Evans' Business Ethics and Changes in Society, as well as 3 other articles that are cited. Then it also shows a picture at a fast food looking business. And the caption is, "The success of some businesses depends largely on whether customers feel that they are being served in a friendly manner. Forward-looking organizations devote considerable effort and invest in expensive training for frontline employees to instill positive attitudes." Here's the picture. External perceptions of culture. Some aspects of an organization's culture are readily apparent to outsiders. When a patron encounters a surly waiter in a restaurant, the patron knows immediately that unless that particular waiter is new to the job and will not last long, the surliness is indicative of the culture of that restaurant. The same attitude is likely to be found in almost all of that restaurant's staff. These readily identified reflections of culture, however, are like the proverbial tip of the iceberg. Perhaps 1/9 of the culture is visible, while the great bulk lies invisible beneath the surface. Exhibit 2.1 on page 48 illustrates the relationship between the visible and unseen portions of organization's culture. Here's the visual. I'll read it to them. So, visible indicators of culture: advertising, interaction with community, treatment of customers, treatment of suppliers, attire, appearance of buildings and grounds, appearance of offices. So that's all the visible indicators. And then the unseen indicators of culture: treatment of people who are different, ethical standards, social responsibility, work ethic, motivation of employees, internal communication, labor management relations, treatment of employees, and core values, beliefs, and attitudes. Building culture. Management success at building positive culture requires selecting, motivating, rewarding, and retaining high-performing employees. In some companies, there is a healthy competition among employees to outdo each other in providing service. For instance, one Air BC employee chased down a mislaid briefcase for a worried lawyer and got it to her in time for an important appearance she was scheduled to make. At Best Western Hotels, there is an oft-recounted story about a desk clerk who took the computer disk of a guest home to print out its files on its personal computer because the software in the hotel's business office was not compatible. In doing so, the hotel employee saved the guest from the terrible embarrassment that would have resulted from not having the necessary printed materials for a vital sales presentation. In both companies, this kind of service is celebrated, and each incident begets others like it. By observing companies with positive cultures, managers will find 3 distinct characteristics that result in culture building: commitment, competence, and consistency. And I'll read that again. By observing companies with positive cultures, managers will find 3 distinct characteristics that result in culture building, which is commitment, competence, and consistency. In building a positive culture, managers continually must strive to instill commitment to a common philosophy and service, develop and reward competence, and consistently find and retain the right people. Organizational socialization is the process through which a newcomer is transformed into an accepted member of the team. Most of this socialization occurs inadvertently and results from the new employee observing how other employees act in given situations. When an organization grows very rapidly, the new members of the group may outnumber those who have worked longer within the prevailing culture. The result may be a change in the corporate culture to reflect the new attitudes and practices of the newcomers, or it may, in more extreme cases, the old and the new cultures may exist side by side, creating disharmony and tension. And before reading the next section, I'll read the relevant definitions. Values: convictions about what is good or desirable, beliefs that a specific mode of conduct is personally or socially preferable to other modes of conduct. Beliefs: conscious or subconscious convictions or expectations that something is true. Attitudes: a manner of thinking, feeling, or holding an opinion. Values as a source of organizational culture. The values held by the individuals within an organization are fundamental to its culture. Values constitute personal convictions that a specific mode of conduct is personally or socially preferable to another mode of conduct. Individuals hold values quite deeply, even when they do not recognize that they are doing so. For some individuals, certain values are extremely important, while for others, the same values are less important. The intensity with which a particular value is held often will be a source of conflict between individuals. Whatever values are held, however, they are fundamental to a person's personality, lifestyle, and reactions to particular situations. Values underlie and give credence to beliefs, sometimes recognized as such, and at other times taking the form of unrecognized assumptions. An individual may believe that people who are newcomers to the organization or who are just different, whether of a different race, gender, sexual orientation, or educational and economic background. So an individual may believe that people who are newcomers to the organization or who are just different are inferior. A person also may assume that members of a particular group automatically share certain undesirable characteristics, such as laziness, selfishness, greed, dishonesty, and immorality, or conversely, and rarely, that they are endowed with superior knowledge and wisdom, social sense, and high standards. The natural result of beliefs is that the individual holding them exhibits corresponding attitudes. If the beliefs about an identifiable group are negative, members of the identified groups become the targets of harassment and friction, and friction inevitably results. In some organizations, beliefs may be positive, such as believing that top managers know all that is happening in the organization. Although such a belief may be gratifying to top managers, it may have negative effects. When middle managers and other employees have this belief, they are likely to feel it is not necessary to communicate problems to top managers. Then, if those problems are not actually recognized by senior managers, those who believe that top managers know all, believe that top managers know about the problems and are simply failing to correct them. More often, of course, non-managerial employees begin with the assumption that management is oppressive and unreasonable. Therefore, when managers suggest changes, those changes are viewed with suspicion and are assumed to be for ulterior motives. Thus, the behaviors of people in an organization depend on their attitudes, which are based on their beliefs, which in turn arise from the values they hold. I'll read that again. Thus, the behaviors of people in an organization depend on their attitudes, which are based on their beliefs, which in turn arise from the values they hold. From this, it can be seen that, to an extent not often recognized, the internal environment of an organization will depend on the values held by the individuals who make up the organization. Exhibit 2.2 illustrates the progression from values through beliefs and attitudes to behaviors. These interrelationships emphasize the need for managers to recognize and be sensitive to values, so they can better interpret and predict employees' attitudes, motivations, and possible reactions. Failure to recognize value differences may lead to an organizational culture in which friction and harassment are everyday occurrences, and managers and non-managerial employees think the worst of each other. I'm going to read that again. Failure to recognize value differences may lead to an organizational culture in which friction and harassment are everyday occurrences, and managers and non-managerial employees think the worst of each other. And here's Exhibit 2.2, which is titled The Importance of Values. It's right here, and it just says values to beliefs, beliefs to attitudes, attitudes to behavior. It's kind of what they explained in the section. Emphasis in values. The values that employees bring to the workplace were largely established in their early years by observing the values held and demonstrated by parents, teachers, relatives, friends, and other peers. The discussions a young person hears at home, in the street, or at school provide a basis for the values that may be carried throughout life. A workforce that includes a range of people from a variety of national, cultural, economic, and religious backgrounds will possess a variety of values spanning many issues that arise in everyday life. As a consequence, today's manager deals with a workforce whose reaction to events may differ considerably from person to person. Some employees will place most value on economic recognition in the form of direct wages and various personnel benefits. Some will value time off to be with their families. Others will seek to work overtime to increase their earnings. Most employees value opportunities to interact socially in connection with their jobs, but these interactions often will focus on a relatively homogeneous grouping of other employees who have similar ethnic, educational, or age characteristics and who have similar levels of responsibility within the organization. Often, people will accord a higher value to matters that have been lacking, such as opportunity for promotion, respect, autonomy, and power, than to matters that have been resolved to their satisfaction and consequently may be taken for granted. I'm going to read that again. Often, people will accord a higher value to matters that have been lacking, such as opportunity for promotion, respect, autonomy, and power, than to matters that have been resolved to their satisfaction and consequently may be taken for granted. Values often change with age. Few 60-year-olds enjoy ear-splitting audio, is in brackets. With significant life experiences, in brackets, losing a job changes one's attitude toward job security, end bracket, with increased education and with personal success. Since values differ, managers must use care in assuming what employees' values are on an issue. In particular, managers must resist the temptation to think that people at other levels in the organization will automatically share their values. The external environment. Managers also must be aware of and adapt to the external environments that affect the organization. Exhibit 2.3 on page 52 presents some of the components of external environments that face managers. For convenience, they can be divided into two interrelated categories: general factors, in brackets, forces that have an impact on a number of companies, and specific factors, in brackets, forces that can directly affect a particular enterprise or task in ways that are different from the impact on other enterprises or tasks. In this chapter, the 5 general factors will be discussed in some detail, but the specific factors vary so much from organization to organization and from task to task that each is effectively unique and does not lend itself to general discussion. And the visual that they were talking about is titled External Environmental Factors Facing Managers. So in the center of the visual, it says the organization's internal culture. And then it has five circles pointing inward to show their effect on it. So those five are social, cultural environment, economic environment, political environment, technological environment, and ecological environment. And we have a management in the real world excerpt titled Mary Kay Leads by the Golden Rule. Mary Kay Ash founded her company on the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have done others do unto you. She believes that to apply the Golden Rule, to make it powerful in your life, you must develop a sense of empathy for other people. Empathy is an essential ingredient of ethics, as well as an important attribute of leadership. Ethical leaders can create an ethical corporate culture that brings out the best in people. Ethical behavior takes on a life of its own and grows if given a chance. Mary Kay Ash believes that ethics is good business. However, an ethical company doesn't exist in a vacuum. To make ethical decisions, businesses must consider the impact on the larger society of which they are part of. In the case of Mary Kay Cosmetics, the larger society includes independent entrepreneurs, the company's beauty consultants, its employees, the communities in which the company is located, and business partners such as suppliers, scientists, medical professionals, the cosmetics industry, and pharmaceutical industry, and the direct selling industry. All of these factored into a decision Mary Kay made in May 1989. The company announced a moratorium on animal testing while it developed and evaluated new testing technology. Mary Kay Cosmetics was one of the first companies to take such a step. The corporate goal was to take the high ground. The decision meant putting a hold on new products for a while, which meant lost sales. It also meant additional investment in evaluating alternatives. Ethical corporate conduct is not easy and can be costly, but Mary Kay believes that ethics is good business, and the company believes that ethical conduct can be measured. Although accountants have given the company many ways to measure goodwill for the balance sheet, loyalty and trust of employees, shareholders, and business partners are important measures too. Mary Kay believes that loyalty and trust are probably the greatest assets a company can have, especially a company where independent entrepreneurs are not tied to the corporation through a paycheck. Loyalty and trust are built on a base of everyday ethical conduct. The ethics of people management has to be based on the fact that the truth is the only way people can trust each other. Mary Kay Cosmetics prides itself on being a caring organization. People still laugh even as they admire her success. When Mary Kay tells them that her ideas on people management are based on the Golden Rule, management by caring and sharing, Mary Kay's core values are a foundation for that approach. We believe in integrity and fairness in every aspect of our lives as expressed by the Golden Rule. We believe that service and quality are essential to our success. We believe that enthusiasm produces a positive can-do attitude, which is a real source of inspiration in working towards our goals. We believe that leadership among our sales force and employees is the key to personal and corporate growth. We believe the priorities of faith, family, and career to be a balanced life. We believe the priorities of faith, family, and career lead to a balanced life. People want to work, they want to create, they want to produce, they want families, and they want their families to live well. They want to live in peace in a clean, safe world. They want someone to care for, they want someone to care about them, to recognize them and reward them for their contributions. Caring competence allows Mary Kay Cosmetics to quickly take the high ground, to use its ethical framework to influence constituents and to help make its communities better. And it's saying it's adapted from Richard C. Bartlett, Mary Kay's Foundation, Journal of Business Strategy, July of 1995, and a couple of other articles. So the external environment input and output. Environmental factors affect an organization from two directions, input and output. The purpose of the organization is to receive and transform inputs to produce an output. The output, whether it be a toaster, a sheet of plywood, an automobile part, or an airline ticket to the Bahamas, goes back into the external environment if it is sold, given away, or accepted. It is then consumed or used, and it is evaluated either consciously or unconsciously. Thus, organizations and their environments are inseparable. Each affects the other. It also will become apparent that managerial skills in observing, analyzing, and forecasting the environment may mean the difference between success and failure, or even between survival and disappearance. Environmental analysis and diagnosis. And I'll read the relevant definition. Environmental analysis, applying rationality to understand the sources and possible effects of environmental factors, and to determine the organization's opportunities and threats. Environmental analysis is the act of monitoring external environmental forces and applying a rational approach to assessing their effects. It is designed to determine the organization's opportunities and threats, and to decide on managerial and strategic decisions that take into account these analyses. And that brings us partway through chapter 2 to page 52, and we'll pick back up at page 52 in the next video. Thanks so much.